What I got, you can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the same. And right now, I feel like 100 grand.
You are listening to Inspired Insider with your host, Dr. Jeremy Weisz.
Dr. Jeremy Weisz here, founder of InspiredInsider.com, where I talk with inspirational entrepreneurs and leaders. You know, Marcel, I love talking about past guests, not just the good stuff, but the tough times. Some past guests include Pipedrive co-founder Mast. He talked about getting brain surgery, getting married, and moving from Estonia to the US all in the same year. At the time, they had 10,000 paying customers when I interviewed them in 2013. Now they have over 100,000 customers. So it's amazing to see their trajectory and tools that are amazing for agencies, you know, and we're going to talk about Marcel's Parakeeto in a second, but shout out to John Doherty, founder of Credo, who introduced me to today's great guest. They help top companies meet the best pre-vetted digital marketing providers within a few days using their platform and company. Jason Swanks, another person I respect in the industry. I know, Marcel, you've chatted with him. He helps agency owners grow their agencies faster, one of the smartest people. We talked about how his newer company buys agencies and how they evaluate them. So check out that episode. And Chris Martinez, founder of Dude, they help digital agencies take on more clients and scale up with a flat rate, unlimited web design and development. And before I introduce to today's guest, this episode is brought to you by Rise 25, which I co-founded with my business partner, John Corcoran. And at Rise 25, we help businesses give to and connect to their Dream 100 partnerships and relationships, and by helping you run your podcast for you. You know, Marcel, I've been podcasting since 2008, and it is, for me, the number one thing in my life is relationships. So I'm always looking at a way to give to my best relationships, and profiling people I admire, their thought leadership and what they're doing and their companies are doing on my podcast is an amazing way that I can give to them. So thank you for coming on. Everyone, if you're interested in podcasting, you can go to rise25.com and watch John, my business partner, and I banter like an old married couple. But it really is amazing for relationship building. Also, when I do a lot of research for this, Marcel, to figure out some of your thought leadership, what you're talking about, so we can get deeper. One of the tools I use is Semrush. And so shout out to Semrush. I use them for research. You can run your SEO, PPC, social media they have over like 40 tools, and I'm not even using probably a fraction of them. They have over 6 million users, and 1 in 4 Fortune 500 companies is an Semrush client. Are you saying you use them too?
I'm also an Semrush client, yes.
Awesome. And so I looked up Parakeeto. I found one of the most popular posts on your site. So I make sure to hit one of the most popular posts. So it was I don't know if you know this, but the agency profitability Flywheel was episode 40 of your podcast, is one of the most popular posts on your site, according to Semrush. So what do? Of course, 80-20, I want to research what's the most important stuff. So I read like the top 20% of what it tells me I should be reading and listening to about you. And they were kind enough to allow me to give anyone a 30-day free trial of their Guru account with no credit card required. I don't get a cut of that or anything like that, even if you sign up afterwards. It's typically $200 a month. If you go to InspiredInsider.com/SEMrushGuru, you can check it out, and no credit card required. So check it out. Today's guest, I just told you, Marcel Petitpas, who is co-founder of Parakeeto. He helps digital agencies run more profitably. And Parakeeto helps agencies and consultancies create accurate, data-driven estimates for their projects in seconds. And they use the information from past projects to show you exactly how much time it's likely to take you to complete your next one, broken down by role. And even if you make changes to the project, you get real-time feedback on how your estimates compare to past projects. And so if you are an agency or any company, like, what are you thinking of, Marcel? Like profitability. Profitability is key. So Marcel, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, Jeremy.
I wanted to start with how you came to this, okay? And maybe, it came out of what you're working on as a consultant. So talk about, you have big client that you work with, Goldfront. What did you learn? through Goldfront?
Yeah. So, I mean, the crazy thing about this industry that has become really, really apparent to me is that it is one of these things. Running an agency is one of these things that a lot of people get sold the idea of, where it's like there's really low or no upfront cost. You know, it can scale. You can charge somebody $10,000 for a thing and they'll pay you up front, and it's amazing. And then once you actually start looking at the business model and what it takes to scale it, you start to realize that it's a really challenging business model to scale. And it's a really challenging business model to do profitably. And I think a lot of that has to do with the complexity of your inventory as human beings, and they're very complex and hard to predict. And, you know, they require a whole bunch of different levels of attention versus just hard goods that you might be selling. So the big lesson that I've learned is that so many agencies are out there. They might be doing amazing work. They might know how to get results for their clients. They might look on the surface like they're doing incredible, but oftentimes when you start peeling back the layers and get inside the business, you realize there's so much money being left on the table. And some of them are really struggling to make payroll from month to month, even though they might be making tons of revenue. So that is the problem that we set out to solve for them, is to help make agencies, you know, more profitable, more stable, so that they can avoid laying off their team. They can grow their impact, they can serve more clients, and they can do that in a sustainable way.
What kind of things do you do with Goldfront?
So Goldfront is a unique case because we're, you know, really in a bit of a partnership. They've brought me in almost as a fractional COO. So I'm really embedded in that business, and I'm helping them streamline all of their operational workflows. And the core place that we started was getting all of their data sorted out. Because I think this is one of the things that agency owners overlook a lot, is that there is a data set that is central to their success, and that is understanding where their time is going, because their time makes up about 70 to 80% of the money that they're spending in their business, you know, every month, every year, every quarter. So it's really, really critical to get the systems in place to track that. But that's a really hard thing to track, and it's a really hard thing to flow through to the different areas of the business where it needs to go. So that's been the bulk of my focus, is making sure that they've got the right systems and processes in place to track that data, to have clear insight into their financials, clear insight into their profitability, and that cascades out to the other operational systems in the business, like sales, like project management, and so on.
What does Goldfront do?
Goldfront does amazing work for some pretty incredible clients. They are a digital and video production agency. So they do an interesting mix of websites and video production, and they work with pretty cool clients. Like, you know, recently we've done some stuff with Robinhood, Slack, Uber, Google, Nike. I mean, the list goes on and on. Really, really amazing work for some fun clients.
You know, Marcel, you mentioned operational workflows, and, you know, for people who aren't agencies or business owners, they may fall asleep when they hear that, but I perk up because it's really what creates efficiency and allows things to run smoothly. So I'm wondering, you know, obviously we'll get into Parakeeto, what Parakeeto does. What other software or things do you use to put in these operational workflows and systems?
Yeah. So, I mean, personally, one of the first tools that I like to use is some kind of a virtual whiteboarding solution. And two of the ones that I've used with various clients that I love are Stormboard. Shout out to my friend Reg, who runs Stormboard, and Miro. Two great options for a virtual workspace where you can collaborate with your team and start to do what we like to call process mapping. So actually writing down what is every step that happens in this workflow, so you can get it out, visualize it, identify the gaps, identify, you know, what it actually looks like. So when you go to create your processes or, you know, your data flows, or you start to set up tools, it's actually set up for success from the start. So that's number one. And then outside of that, you know, time tracking tools. And I'm not going to be super opinionated about this because there's a billion time tracking tools out there, and a lot of them are very good. I'm partial to Harvest because I think it's really good at the two things that are most important about time tracking. Number one, the data structure side. It's independent from project management tools, which I think is an important thing because it allows you to define the structure of your time tracking data and associate that back to your estimate structure, which is a super key thing that so many people miss. And the second thing is that it makes it easy for your team to enter their time, which is another big reason that a lot of people struggle with time tracking, is they make it too hard for their team. So Harvest is my recommendation on time tracking, but really any time tracking tool that you and your team will use, I'm behind it. I'm voting for it.
Talk about, you have to make a decision to who to integrate with, right? With Parakeeto, because you integrate. So how did you decide on the integration partners, and who did you integrate with?
Yeah. So right now we only integrate with Harvest. Of course, we're looking to change that, but the big decision there, we just had to do with who had the most market share. And we started collecting that data, early on when we were doing content, and we had our lead magnets that people would download. We're giving away free resources. We still do. And when you download a free resource from us, you tell us what time tracking tool you're using. And we just saw that the number one time tracking tool was nothing, unfortunately. So about 50% of the
People are not using anything.
A spreadsheet or none. Yeah.
Right.
So no formal time tracking tool. It makes up about half of the leads that we were getting. And then beyond that, their Harvest had by and large the biggest level of market share in our target market. Then after that, it was Toggle and Clockify and a couple more. And then it trails off into the sea of, 100 time tracking tools that one or two people are using. So made it pretty clear that Harvest was where the initial opportunity was to really validate the product and figure it out.
Yeah, it's really interesting because when you talk to even, when I interviewed Wade of Zapier, they had to decide early on who do you integrate with because they only have so many resources to do that. So you discovered this issue working with Goldfront. What is the issue, and what did you go set out to solve?
Yeah. So, it was working with Goldfront, but, we also had lots of other agencies that we were talking to and working with on kind of smaller engagements. And what we kept coming back to, it's funny because when we started the business, we had this thesis that it was hard for agencies to track really important information, like did we make money on this project? Do we have enough capacity to take on new work? And that thesis still holds true, but we didn't really understand the core problem behind all of that, the reason why it was so hard for them to track this stuff. And when we started working really closely with Goldfront and with some of these other clients, what we started realizing was that all of them were trying to do the same thing. They were trying to get these outcomes. They were trying to get this visibility and this reporting, but they were trying to build that on like a quicksand foundation of really inaccurate estimates for their work. So when you take a step back and you think about it, when you run a service business, when you're trying to plan when you're going to hire or who you're going to hire, when you're trying to plan your cash flow, your profitability, when you're trying to do resource planning, when you're trying to, manage your pipeline and reconcile that against your team and their availability, all of that comes back to your ability to say, this project is going to take roughly this much time, and that's going to be split up against these different skill sets, and to have that be relatively true. And this was one of these fundamental processes that all these agencies had kind of overlooked. And when we started peeling back the onion and digging into why that was, we realized that it was just this very manual, ad hoc, and often subjective thing that only the most senior people in the agency were doing, because it was very much this like gut feel. Let's think back to some things we've done before. Let's rely on our historical experience doing. Also,
it's like factors in the client's personality or company you're working with. Like, oh, I think they're going to be easier to work with, so maybe they won't have as many changes. There's a lot of probably gut feel and factors there, right?
Exactly. And when we started asking people, what would you want to change about your estimation process? What would make it a 10 out of 10? Everybody said the same thing, which is I want it to be more objective. I want it to be more data driven, and I want it to be less reliant on these particular individuals that were just basically counting on their 10 years working for the company to have this kind of subtle sense of what is the appropriate estimation for this project. So that's what we kind of set out to solve with our product. And I'm really excited about what we've been building.
So it seems like people are bad at pricing. Is that true?
Yeah.
Estimating pricing.
Yeah, there are a lot of people that are pretty bad at it. And it's not, obviously it's not intentional. It has a lot to do with their biases and this thing that I like to call kind of the optimistic estimation bias, where you come up with a number in your head, and that number is based on everything going perfectly. Like your cat not throwing up on your home office bed while you're trying to do the project, you not having to go to the doctor, you having a perfectly fast internet connection, the client giving you everything you need right at the beginning of the project. Like all the things that
always happens,
could go wrong, right? So yeah, I think that's one of the challenges. And then the other challenge is, not actually taking the time to go back and learn from our mistakes. So a lot of times we get into this pattern where we say, well, this is what we usually estimate for this project, but we're not going back to look at the data and seeing that, like, well, we are consistently underestimating that by 27%. So like the baseline estimation needs to go up by 27%, but we're not looking at like, what did it actually take? We're just kind of relying on what we estimated last time and not really considering if it was accurate or not.
walk me through a use case. So I know, and it could be the e-commerce web development company or not, the pricing before, and now they use Parakeeto. What are they seeing and how are they able to shift their pricing for later projects?
Yeah. So it's interesting because it is a nice forcing function a lot of the time for people to charge more. But what it is mostly is a nice proxy for them to more accurately estimate what it's going to take to get the project done and distribute the time more realistically. So we see a lot of use cases. Like, for example, we have a client that they realized immediately when they started using our tool that they were way under budgeting project management. And they were wondering, like, why is our project manager always kind of like stressed and always looks like they're drowning? And like, why are we struggling so much with that? And it's like, oh, because we're underestimating it by 30% on almost every project. So that was a really great insight for them to go and adjust, like, how much time they're budgeting for that. They went and got some additional support in the project management team. They started working with their project manager to figure out how to make things more efficient. So those are the kinds of insights that you'll get immediately. And then on the back end of that, yeah, I mean, we've seen their profitability almost double since they started using the tool about 2 months ago. So their per project profitability has gone up. Their average gross margin has come up quite a bit. And I think that's part of the power of the tool as well, is being able to see what is my gross margin going to look like as you're building this. And the big difference is seeing that next to the projects that you've selected as comparables, so that you know not only do these numbers look good, but they're realistic based on what we've done before. That's the key.
Marcel, it seems like there's a kind of a combination of hiring also in there and pricing, because I could see, you know, it seems like in that particular case, they're like, well, you know, there's probably 10 hours of project management that we didn't even realize was there. And now that we realize is there, we need to price this project higher, but also realize, well, our project manager is tapped out. We need to hire another project manager. Have you seen that factor in also?
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge part of why the estimation process is so critical, because you can't just like clone your project manager, right? You need to have a really clear sense of how much time you're going to need for a particular skill set. And that's been a big revelation for a few of our clients, is realizing that they're over or understaffed in a certain area, and realizing that what they thought it took to get something done was not at all the reality.
I've heard you also talk about pricing. You know, pricing, you've talked about how pricing isn't necessarily a function of hours, but of value. Can you talk about how people should think about pricing?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the things that I get pushback on a lot. As soon as I start talking about hours, right, people immediately get the sense that I'm talking about the old school way of pricing in the industry, which is pricing by the hour and using more of like a cost basis and plus margin to do your pricing. And I will fully acknowledge that I don't think that's the best way for most agencies to price. And I don't think it's the best way for most agencies to maximize their profitability. So really, I look at it as you got to assess the level of risk that you're taking on. And I think for most agencies that are doing more creative or marketing type stuff, there's probably an opportunity for you to look at what is the relative value of solving this problem for the client and to price based on that. And then go and check if that's going to give you a high enough margin for it to be safe, right? Because, you know, it's great if you can charge $500,000 for a website, but it's not so great if it costs you $400,000 to build the website. So, you know, you got to go and do that check. But the fundamental idea is it more valuable to solve or to increase a conversion rate by 1% on a website that's doing $1 million a month in revenue, or a website that's doing $100 million a month, right? Who's getting more value in that equation? It's a really simple example, but I think it's worth noting, like if I can increase your conversion rate by 1% and you're going to make an additional, you know, $10 million, then is it reasonable for me to ask for 10% of that as a fee, regardless of whether or not it costs me, you know, $1,000 or $100,000 to do that work? So that's kind of the way that I like to think about value-based pricing. And I think it's something a lot of people should explore, but not without still having a process to reconcile. Does the estimated amount of work it's going to take to get this done net us a margin that is, you know, healthy enough to make this sustainable?
What would be another example of a value-based pricing? So that was a good example. I also have heard you talk about logos.
Yeah.
Talk about that, but also any other examples so people can kind of I need to wrap my own head around different examples of value-based pricing also.
Right. So one that I like to talk about is the $1 million logo, right? Is a logo worth $1 million, Jeremy? Would you pay $1 million for a logo?
If
Probably
I was
not.
Nike,
Yeah,
yes.
maybe if you were, yeah, exactly. Maybe if you were Nike, maybe if you were, some huge airline, like if the print budget for that logo was $100 million, then it makes perfect sense to pay $1 million for that logo, if only to have the sense that it's being de-risked, right? That a design decision that has that big of an impact, that has that big of a wave behind it, should, be valued at that much just because the risk is so high. Whereas, if I go to my local pizza shop and ask them how much they'll pay to get a logo done, their budget might be a couple $100, and that's justified because the impact is just not going to be quite as big. But that's the conversation that you want to have, is like, what is this going to be used for? How is it going to impact your business? How does that correlate to revenue? What's it worth to you emotionally, financially? Like, what do you value your time at? What do you value the strategy of it at? And try to get a sense of like, what does this actually mean from a value perspective for the business? And you might find that there's a really significant gap between what you wanted to charge for that and what they're actually willing to pay. It might be a lot more than what you're coming in, with that number in your head at.
You started, Marcel, as an agency in VR. Yeah. What was your initial thought? And that VR fascinates me. So I want to hear what your initial pitch was, and what was that your agency like at the time?
Yeah, that's a funny story. At the time, I was working as an account manager for Apple, and there was this guy that just kind of kept coming into the store. And one day he was like an older guy, and he had some connections in real estate. He had a couple friends that were, big real estate brokers around town. And he was like, they're asking for this. They want these virtual tours. Like, do you, and he sees me as like some young guy that works for Apple. He's like, tech, can you figure this out? I'm like, yeah, I can figure this out. So, I get on YouTube and I get on Google and I figure out how to, and this was back before like any good technology was available for this, like before Matterport. So you had to get a DSLR, put it on a special like mounting system, take like a bunch of photos, stitch them together, and then load them into a VR like 3D modeling software, build a model of the house, and then place these like hotspots around the house that people could travel through. And the idea was, the real estate agents, instead of driving all day to visit a dozen houses, they could sit their clients in an office, throw a VR headset on them, have them take tours of a dozen houses, and then go see the two that they actually like. So it's
which in COVID is probably a great, like you were right behind the times. You were ahead of your time.
I was a little ahead of my time. And, one of the challenges is at the time, our housing market here was in this huge slump. So houses weren't selling, the price points were down. It was a total buyer's market. Sellers were, like their houses weren't selling for nearly as much as they should have. And real estate agents were really stingy at the time. So they weren't willing to really pay enough for that service for me to be able to outsource. So this was when I learned about this challenge of like margins are important, because I started figuring out like, okay, can I hire somebody to do this for me? Because I hated the work of going in and taking the pictures and stitching them. Oh man, I hated it. So I was like, I need to get this off my plate as quickly as possible. I started doing the math and I was like, man, this is not going to work. This is not going to scale. We can't build a business on these kind of margins. And at that point, I had some challenges with the business partner. I thought, what, I'm just going to move on to something else.
So it goes from agency to consultancy to software. Okay. Mm-hmm. Did you always have the thought that, okay, I need to create a software solution?
It was a field that interested me a lot from the very beginning. And I think part of it in the younger years was naivety, right? It was like, well, software is like the sexy thing. And, I'm clearly a special gifted unicorn entrepreneur that's going to crush it. So like, obviously I'm going to go to the hardest, but I think that's very indicative of like my personality. It's like, I start a new video game I've never played before. I'm like, yeah, let's go to the max difficulty right away. Like that's kind of how I looked at this. I was like, software has the highest risk, the highest reward. It seems like one of the most grueling spaces in entrepreneurship. So I just figured like, if I'm going to take the risk, I might as well go all the way. And if nothing else, it'll be a great learning experience. And that has certainly been the case.
So someone wants to use Parakeeto. How does it work?
Yeah, it's pretty simple. They connect their time tracking tool, in this case, Harvest. But if we don't have an integration with your tool, please make a request so that we know you want it. It'll automatically pull in all the information about your past projects. And then to create an estimate, basically you choose a couple of settings. So is this monthly? Is it a one-time project? You'll choose a couple of modeling options. So do you want to start with the client's budget? Do you want to start by setting some hours and setting a target rate? Do you want to set rates for all the different tasks or services individually? So you kind of choose your style. Then you'll choose a couple of projects that look similar to the one that you're estimating. And then we drop you into this beautiful workspace where every change you make, you have graphs for exactly how that change impacts the profitability of the project and shows you exactly how it aligns to the projects you've done in the past. So you can see on a graph, like, we're estimating 25 hours. This other project I chose as comparable was 29. And the trend line that Parakeeto is recommending, we have some algorithms that help recommend the right amount of hours, says I should be budgeting 25. So I think I'm in a good spot. And once you're done with your estimate, you can share it, you can save it, you can duplicate it, create templates, you can collaborate with your team, and really just use that to dial in your estimation workflow and get more accurate.
How do you decide on pricing for Parakeeto?
Yeah, my rule of thumb is if I don't feel like throwing up on myself when I ask somebody for a consulting engagement price, I'm not charging enough. For Parakeeto, it was much more scientific than that. We priced it at $30 per user per month. So if you have 3 or 4 people in the organization that touch the estimation process, then you might be spending between $90 and $120 a month on the tool.
Got it.
Yeah.
Who are some of the mentors that you or colleagues that you respect in the industry that you call on for advice or vice versa?
Yeah, I mean, certainly one that has been hugely influential in my life is Dan Martell, who runs a company called SaaS Academy, which is the #1 B2B SaaS coaching program in the world. I've known Dan for a long time. He lives in Moncton, which is a small place on the East Coast of Canada. I think you mentioned you had never talked to anybody from the East Coast of Canada.
On an interview. Really, I haven't interviewed
Right.
Dan. Right, yeah.
But really unlikely success story, from this part of the world. And he's been hugely influential. And I've met a lot of really cool people through that community as well that have been super impactful. Obviously, we know a lot of the same folks too from the agency space. So guys like Jason Swank, the David C. Bakers, John is a good friend and has been a great advisor. Kelly Campbell, Carl Sakis. So lots of awesome people in the agency industry, and Carl Smith over at the Bureau of Digital as well. I got to give a shout out to him. So those are some of the folks that have really been helpful in, allowing me to get this business off the ground. And I got to give one more shout out to a local Moncton entrepreneur, my friend, Mark Albert over at DPL, as well as Yves Doucette from Dovico, which is a time tracking company here in Moncton that is, kind of a local staple in the tech community, and they've been around for a long time. So all guys that, really kind of took me under their wing early on when they knew that I knew nothing, and helped kind of show me the way.
So is he mad at you that you haven't integrated with him yet, Marcel?
I don't know, man. I'm not sure. Yves doesn't really do the day-to-day anymore.
What's that company called again?
It's called Dovico. It's a time tracking company.
Got it. Cool. Yeah, thanks for that. And then what did Mark Alvaro, what does he do?
He runs a company called DPL. I think it stands for Digital Products Limited, but they have a wireless interface or a wireless module for ATMs.
Cool.
Which is a real problem, I guess.
Wow. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So we talked about hiring, pricing, estimation. Are there any other big mistakes you see agencies doing? Because you have this broad perspective. You are working with a lot of agencies from the software and from the consultancy side. So what are you seeing big mistakes?
Yeah, I think the biggest one is just not actually paying attention to how efficiently they earn their revenue. And there's like 2 easy ways that they can do that. They can look at their gross margin, or they can look at their average billable rate. But really and I see this most with the agencies that have a salaried team. When you're paying contractors to do your work, you kind of have to pay attention to how much that's costing you. It's a natural forcing function because you're going to eat that cost every time they work an hour. But when you have a salaried team, for whatever reason, people start kind of just disregarding the idea that the amount of time that somebody spends doing the work matters. But that's almost all that matters, actually. And you need to still pay just as close of attention to that as if you were paying everyone by the hour. And in a sense, you kind of have to treat, or you should treat your agency that way, that even though you're paying them a salary, do the math, figure out what they cost every hour, and then make sure that you're investing that cost in the right places in your business and that you're being efficient. That's the biggest mistake, I think, is just not paying attention to how efficiently they earn their revenue, because that's really the bedrock of their profitability. And so many of the challenges that they face and the symptoms that they experience of, having tough cash flow, having poor profitability, having trouble with resource planning, the team feeling overworked, all of those tend to stem from this fundamental lack of a foundation of accurate estimation and fundamental profitability when they set up a project.
And then, Marcel, you feel like, I guess, that makes more sense. Maybe you said over half the people don't even use time tracking, and it's maybe because they have salaried staff and they feel like, what's the point? Like, I'm paying them anyways.
Exactly. Yeah. And they're just not thinking about the business model in the right way, I think, in that situation.
I could tell you're a tech stack type of person, so I'm curious what tech stack. So obviously an ideal tech stack, right? We have Parakeeto, we have Harvest. What other tech stack should be in someone's agency?
Yeah, I mean, insert project management tool of choice.
What's yours?
This is one thing that I like to, so I really like, there's three that I like. I like Monday.com, I like Asana, and I like Airtable as well, actually. I think Airtable is like a really cool, powerful tool, not just for project management, but for basically building databases for your business. Like, love Airtable, highly recommend. So yeah, insert project management tool of choice. And the one thing that I want to call out here is I think most of the time, even though it's really easy to get sucked into the value prop of integrated time tracking, I feel like for most of you, you should keep your time tracking tool separate from your project management tool. And here's the reason why. One of the biggest problems that I see in agencies is when we look at the estimate and then we look at the time tracking data, you can't match them together. The estimate says this many hours of development, this many hours of design, and then we go to the time tracking and it's like 20 minutes for wireframing, front end UI, and I'm like, what does that map to on the estimate? So this is why so many agencies have trouble answering that fundamental question of like, did we estimate this correctly? Because they've got to parse all of this data and reconcile it back to the estimate. And the reason that happens most of the time is because the project management and the time tracking are integrated. And so the project management tool dictates the structure of that time tracking data. And a lot of the time, the structure of your project management tool and the structure of your time tracking data should be different. And if they're integrated, you're asking one team, either operations or project management, to make a compromise. And that doesn't have to be the case. So quick side tangent, but I recommend keeping those tools separate for that reason. So yeah, insert project management tool of choice. And then on the back end, insert some kind of reporting tool and an accounting tool as well. So QuickBooks or Xero for accounting, either one of those are going to work great. And then some kind of a central place for you to do your reporting. Unfortunately, Google Sheets or Airtable, probably still your best bets for reporting. I hope that we can solve that problem one day. It's a big, dangerous, difficult problem to solve, but that's probably still going to be your best friend, is using like a Google Sheets or an Airtable. If you want some templates to help you with that, we've got some on the website, so make sure you go check those out.
May have to opt in. No, I'm just kidding. No, but you do have a toolkit, right, on the site? And I have two last questions, Marcel, and I want to point people towards before I ask you.
Sure.
Go to parakeeto.com. Okay, it's PARAKEETO.com. You also have a toolkit, right?
Yes.
So where can people find that?
They can head to parakeeto.com/rise25. And okay. I'll put together a special little toolkit for them there. I'll add a couple bonuses to that. But yeah, in that toolkit, we'll walk you through the agency profitability flywheel framework, which is the framework that we use with all of our consulting clients to help them improve their profitability fast, as well as maintain their profitability over time. And in there's a bunch of checklists and templates that we also use with our consulting clients. So you're basically getting the do-it-yourself version of the consulting that we charge a lot of money for.
It's amazing. Thank you. Yeah, it's super valuable. Last two questions, Marcel. Any other places we should point people towards, though? Online, on your website?
I will second your statement about podcasting at the beginning of the show. We also love podcasting. I'm a huge fan of that. So I have my own podcast, the Agency Profitability Podcast. So if you like listening to podcasts and you like profitability and you run an agency, then you should probably check it out and subscribe and consume some of that content as well.
I listened to several episodes. It's really good. Check it out. Last two questions, Marcel. I always ask, since Inspired Insider, what's been a low moment and how you push through, and then what's been a proud moment on the other side?
Yeah, these are good questions. So I would say one of the low moments was early, well, not even early on. It's about halfway through the journey if we look at the timeline as being the beginning of the company to today. I started this company originally with a friend of mine. His name is Jared. He runs an agency in Boise, and we kind of both agreed on this thesis that, like, man, it is way too hard to answer these simple questions as an agency owner without spending a ton of time in spreadsheets. And we kind of set down the path to create the company. We made some agreements at that time about like how long each of us were going to invest for and how far the company was going to get. And of course, as most things go, it didn't go the way we thought it was going to. About a year and a half in, we hadn't hit the milestones that we thought we were going to hit. We weren't getting the traction that we thought we were going to get. And that was a really difficult moment where him and I had to have some difficult conversations about, how the business was going to move forward and what each other's involvement was going to be. And I think for a while that was a TSN turning point, if you will, in our relationship. And thankfully that's kind of come full circle. And he's still on the board. He's still a part of the company. He's still an important part of what we're doing. But that was a difficult moment. And I think partly because, the business wasn't doing what we expected, but I think as an entrepreneur, you get used to that reality. But the big thing was, the relationship, and an important relationship with a person that I really respected and admired and gave me a big opportunity that for a while was kind of on shaky ground because I think some of the things we had to work through at that time. And
building
then
a company is no joke, Marcel. I mean, it's really tough, anyone who says different, I don't know what's going on with that. But before we get to the proud moment, what's some great advice Dan Martell has given you? Obviously, he's helped a lot of companies. He built his own successful companies. What advice has he given you?
Man, we would need a whole other episode, I think, to go through that, because I'm really fortunate that I get to be very close to that guy, and he'll just show up at my house and be like, "We're going for a run," and you can't be around the guy without having a deep conversation. He's not the kind of person that wants to talk about the weather. He always wants to just talk about real stuff. So there's a lot of things that he's shared with me that have really impacted me. I think two of the biggest ones, though, are the way that he manages his calendar and just watching that. And what he says about it is, show me your calendar and I'll show you your future. And I've watched Dan, everything goes into his calendar, including his personal life. Right. And a lot of people think that's weird. And I got some pushback from some of the relationships in my life when I started doing that. But really the way you got to look at it is, if it's important, it should be in my calendar. So the reason that he schedules family time is not because it's not important or because it's like it has to fit with his schedule. It's because he wants to make sure that nothing's going to encroach on that and that he can protect it. And I think the idea of protecting time is something that's really changed the way I approach my life and prioritize the things that are important and make space for them. So that's one. And the second one is, he said, if you look at your competitive landscape, almost everyone that is around today will not be around in 5 years. It's half the game that you're playing right now is survival. You just need to find a way to survive for 5 years, and in that time, you'll figure it out. And that's been, I think, an important mental shift for us, because it's taken us a lot longer to get to the places that we wanted to get to than we expected. And so remembering that so much of the game we're playing here is survival has been an important way to keep getting up every day and doing the hard things that we need to do to move the business forward.
Protect your calendar and survive.
That's
Love it. So proud moment, Marcel, for you in this journey.
Yeah. I would say that honestly, it was the day that my new co-founder and the CTO of our company, we kind of inked that paperwork and brought him into the company. This is a guy that has become one of my closest friends. He's a person that I think is so incredible, and was the VP engineer. So I remember I had a conversation with another mentor, and I was asking him about finding a CTO, and he said, well, here's what you need to find. And he described this this person that I didn't think I could find. And if I did, I didn't know how I was going to convince them to join our company. So they have to have, they have to be super smart, super qualified CTO, tons of experience. Also has to have experience at a company that's relevant in adjacent space, a big company, hopefully a leading company. So he's like ex-VP engineering at Harvest, ex-VP engineering at Asana, and I'm like, okay. And he goes, and they have to be so excited about what you're doing that they're willing to make an investment in the company to join it. And I was like, how am I ever going to find that person? And my co-founder, Ben Zitlau, is that person. He was, the VP engineering at Jobber, which was the second fastest growing company in Canada behind Shopify. They're in an adjacent space. So they were doing like an end-to-end business management platform for service companies, more so in the blue collar space. So electricians, plumbers, that kind of stuff. And yeah, like we really hit it off. We worked well together, and eventually we made an agreement to have him join the company. And it's been so much fun working with him. He's been such an incredible addition to the company. We wouldn't be where we are today without him. And just the opportunity to bring him into the company was probably one of the most important moments for me personally and for us as a company.
How did you convince him?
I don't know. To this day, I really don't know. But I think our approach, there is something to learn about this approach.
It was the parrot shirt. No,
it must have been the parrot
shirt. Yeah.
There's something about the charisma that must have, I don't know, pushed him over the edge. But no, the way that it all happened was very organic and very natural. And I think I would take this same approach again if I had to do it over. And a lot of this, again, was advice from Dan. And Dan, always talks about ask for advice and you'll get the sale. Ask for the sale and you'll get advice. And this is kind of how I approached this relationship with Ben. I was introduced to him by a couple of friends, Reg at Stormboard, actually, and my friend Pavel, who runs a company called Snap Projections. They said, you got to talk to this guy, Ben. He's a consultant that we hired. We brought him in and he helped us, fix some stuff in our business. And I'm sure he'll be willing to help you. And at the time, Ben had recently left, his VP job at Jobber, and he was freelancing. And I just said, hey man, I want to hire you for a few months to help us move the product forward. And I'm going to be interviewing CTO candidates, and I'd love your help vetting them. And so we started working together. It was going really well. And then he kind of circled back one day and said, hey, I might be interested in being the CTO. Like, let's talk about that. And then we really took it slow. We said, all right, let's work together for a while. Let's make sure we spend some time together. So we rented a cabin in the woods in Alberta and hung out, went to Banff, went to Canmore, and spent a few days, like really making sure that we were aligned from a vision, from a values perspective. And at the end of all of that, finally, we were able to make all the dollars and cents work, and we brought him in. But I think I focused on the relationship and really not trying to force it. Like, yes, I wanted him to join the company, but I also didn't want to mislead him. I didn't want to, pretend that I was somebody that I wasn't, or that I had a different vision for the company than I had. And it all worked out in the end.
Marcel, I want to be the first one to thank you. Everyone check out parakeeto.com. And if you want all those special spreadsheets, bonuses that they use with their consulting clients, go to parakeeto.com/rise25. And Marcel, thank you so much. Awesome.
Jeremy, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
What I got, you can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sailing right now. I feel like $100 grand.